In this tutorial, we'll illustrate how sketch carving can take a photo or a 3D model and create a V-carve toolpath that picks out the key parts of your source imagery. The result of using a bitmap is a more stylistic look than photo V-carving, and when used with 3D content, the 2D version is quicker to machine than a 3D version while giving you another option when it comes to your investment into 3D content. The key thing to remember when cutting a sketch carving is that the best practices for V-carving and photo V-carving apply. A sharp V-bit, flat material, and spoil board, and a contrasting finish will help ensure amazing results. Sketch carving can be used in combination with all of your other Toolpath strategies, and with its simple to use options, you will soon see how flexible and powerful it can be, giving you new options for your projects and clients. Let's get right into this. As you can see, I have a fresh new instance of VCarve Desktop up and running. Now it's important to remember that the sketch carving Toolpath strategy is also available in VCarve Pro and Aspire as well. So I'm going to go ahead and start by creating a file. Now the first thing we're going to look at and explore is how to use a bitmap with inside of the sketch carving Toolpath strategy. A little later on in this video, we'll look at using some 3D content. So this is going to be a single-sided job. The width of our job will be 10 inches. The height will be 8. The thickness will be 0.75. And of course, we're using inches as our units. Now we're going to be zeroing off our material surface, and with a lot of the V-carving strategies, including V-carving text and doing photo V-carving, this is where we suggest you should zero off your V-bit, is off the top of your material. You're going to want to make sure, again, like I said, you are going to follow the best practices for V-carving and photo V-carving. So you're going to want to have a nice flat piece of material, a nice sharp bit. Want to make sure that your machine is true and that you have an idea for a nice contrasting finish in the end. So we're going to put our datum for right now in the center of our job. When it comes to actually doing the toolpaths, we may decide to move it to the bottom left, but for right now we'll just leave it in the center. We're going to choose a very high modeling resolution. Now you may be asking, why are we doing that? Because we're only using a 2D bitmap. Well, the actual strategy for the sketch carving takes advantage of the resolution of our actual job. So the higher the resolution, the better the sketch carving results will be, or the more detail you can get from your sketch carving. So that's something just to keep in mind. For my material setup, I'm going to be using Canadian maple. I think that's going to be perfectly fine, and we'll go ahead and click OK. Okay, to get started, we're going to need to go ahead and import in a bitmap. So up underneath our file operations, we're going to choose import a bitmap or vector from a file. So I'll click that, and I'm going to choose this wedding photo right here. This is just a wedding photo that I happened to find online. It will not be included with your tutorial. So if you just have a bitmap that's of a decent resolution, then it should be perfectly fine for the sketch carving Toolpath strategy. So I'm going to open that up, and it'll instantly be imported right into the center of my job. Now this bitmap has lots of contrast in it. It's nice and clear. There's not a whole lot of stuff happening in the sky. The waves are pretty clearly defined, and so are the people. So if your bitmap isn't quite like this, or you need to make some really subtle edits, then we have two tools that are built right into your software that will help with this. We have your picture editor and also your crop bitmap tool. If you want a little bit more information on how to use those tools, there will be a related video for that, so you can watch it and get a little more insight into how to use those two tools. So for right now, I have all that I need to go ahead and use the sketch carving Toolpath strategy. So let's jump over to our Toolpaths tab. And the first thing, as always, we are going to check our material setup. So right now, our material is going to be 0.75 inches thick. We're going to move our datum to the bottom left-hand corner. We're going to be zeroing our V-bit off the top of our material. Make sure that our model position is at the very top of our job. And these rapid Z-gaps and home start position are safe and appropriate for my machine. So I can just go ahead and click OK. Now this is your sketch carving Toolpath strategy, so I'm just going to click on that. And again, I have the bitmap selected, and as soon as I do that, because I'm looking at my 2D view, the strategy will go ahead and pull out some of the details from the photo that it feels that I might want to sketch carve. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to tile my views with my 2D view on one side and my 3D view on the other side. In my 3D view, I'm going to turn on my bitmap so we can see what's happening here. Until we actually calculate the toolpath, you won't see it in the 3D view. And we're going to go back to our sketch carving form. Now, just like VCarving and our photo VCarve strategy, we've got a start depth that we can define. For right now, we want it to be the top of our material, so that's going to be 0. And we can also define a flat depth if we would like to. That'll come in handy if there's big areas of your source bitmap that are full of green where you're worried that maybe the V-bit will go right through your material. You might want to consider, in that case, using a flat depth. We're going to use a 60-degree V-bit. That's going to be perfect for what we're doing. Now we have a chance to set our machining limits. For our first shot at this, we are going to use the bitmap boundary. So the sketch carving will go right out to the edge of our bitmap and try and find all the detail that it thinks it needs to sketch carve. Our boundary offset, now this will extend the region in which sketch carving is applied, but right now we're just going to leave it at 0. And then we can go ahead and choose our tracing parameter. So this is more or less the thickness of the green areas that you see here. So right now it's set to 15. I can go down to 5. And as soon as I do that, you'll note that in my 2D view, I'm getting a lot more of the finer detail. If I put it up to 25, then you'll notice that I'll get less detail and thicker carving. So you're going to need to figure out the right balance for your image. So I'm going to go back to about 13. Okay, I can also go ahead and project the results of this onto a 3D model. You might want to explore that a bit later. We're not going to explore that in this tutorial, but that is something you might want to consider. And we can also go ahead and use the vector selector if we would like to. But for right now, don't have any vectors selected, so that's not really all that important. And we can leave the name as it is, sketch carving number 1, and we can go ahead and click calculate. Now it may take a few seconds depending on your line thickness that you've chosen for the toolpath to generate or to calculate. And now you can see in the 3D view we have our sketch carving toolpath, and that looks really neat. So to get a real sense of how this is going to look in the end, we should preview that toolpath. And that looks pretty nice. We can also go ahead and color our toolpath if we'd like to. That'll kind of give us a little bit more contrast so we can see what's going on. And that result is really good. Now in this case, there are a few bits that we might not want to have actually sketch carved. For instance, this line across the top, which happens to be the edge of my bitmap, and maybe even this line across the bottom I might not want to have sketch carved. So let's just go ahead and close this down. In our 2D view, we're going to go over and quickly pop up our design tab just temporarily by hovering over the design, the word design. I'm going to go down and create a rectangle. And in my 2D view, I'm just going to go ahead and draw a rectangle in around the area that I want it to sketch carve. That looks great, and I can adjust the handles if I like to. I could have done that right in the 3D view if I'd like to too. And we'll just go ahead and apply, and I'll close this down. And we'll unpin my design tab. Perfect. Okay, great. Now I'm going to go back into my toolpath here, and we're going to try the selected vector option. So with my bitmap selected, hold down my shift key and select that vector. And then I'm going to choose selected vector. And you see that as soon as I do that, it's going to update the green areas in my 2D view to show me what's going to be sketch carved. We can calculate that. And we can reset our preview. Then we'll re-preview that toolpath. And you see that now I only have the area of the photo sketch carve that was inside of that rectangle. And that looks really, really nice. Now take this one step further. If you happen to have areas of your bitmap that you might not want to have sketch carved, for instance, maybe we might want to actually put a word in the water and on the beach here, then we can easily do that again just by creating some quick vectors and making sure that we choose those vectors when we calculate our toolpath. So let's give that a go. Let's close this down, and we're going to go ahead and maximize our 3D view just for a second. We'll jump back over to our design tab, and we'll go to our text feature for a second here, and we're going to type in the word forever. And that's a decent font, and we'll just click close. And it's appeared down here. So we're just going to go ahead and move that up onto my job. And we'll zoom in. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to choose to offset that outwards. But 1/8 of an inch, that should be all right. So we'll go ahead and offset that outwards. Close this down. I'm going to go ahead and deselect with my Shift key held down the outside border, and I'm just going to delete the stuff in the middle. Then we can zoom back out again. Okay, and then we're going to go back to our Toolpath tab. Let's just go ahead and tile our views again. Go back into our sketch carving toolpath. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to add in this boundary right there, and then we'll just recalculate that toolpath. And if we reset our preview, and then we'll preview that visible toolpath, we now have that space here that didn't get sketch carved. Now we can close this down and we'll add in one extra toolpath. Let's go ahead and add in a V-carving toolpath. We'll just go with the settings that are here. So start depth of 0. We'll use that same 60-degree V-bit. We don't want a clearance tool. And we'll just call it VCarve1, and we'll calculate that. Then we can preview that visible toolpath. And again, we can go ahead and color that if we'd like to. Maximize our 3D view. And that looks really neat. A very stylized version of that bitmap, quickly V-carved into your material of choice, and we've customized it with some nice text. That looks really neat. Now let's go ahead and have a look at what happens when you use some 3D content in the sketch carving toolpath strategy. Okay, to do that, we're going to go over and close down this file. And we'll open up a brand new file. So I'm going to go over to Open Existing File. And inside your tutorials folder, you will find a file called rooster_welcome.crv. So we can just select that and we'll open that up. Okay, now that file's open, let's go ahead and tile our views. So you'll see that in our 3D view, we have a composite layout here. And if we look at our component tree, we have two different components, one called banner and then one that's the rooster. Now, this is free 3D content that you get with your software, but I like you to keep in mind that you can use any 3D content if you'd like to. If you've got a third-party 3D model that you've imported in, you've pasted it into your job, then you can go ahead and use that as well. So we also have some text here that I've added in, just simple welcome text that I've gone ahead and made sort of flow along the banner. So let's go ahead now and jump over to our Toolpaths tab. And we'll go straight into checking our material setup. So again, you'll see the thickness of our material is 0.75 of an inch thick. Our datum is set to the center. Move it to the bottom left-hand corner. Okay, we're going to be zeroing off our material surface. So remember that even though we're using 3D content, we are actually creating a VCarve toolpath. So we're going to want to make sure that we're zeroing off our material surface. And even with this job, the same with the bitmap job, we're going to want to make sure that our material is nice and flat. We have a nice sharp bit and our machine is true so that we'll get the best results that we can from our sketch carving. My model position is at the top of my material. And if you get a warning that says your model does not fit within your material thickness, even though you're not going to cut it as a 3D thing, you can just go ahead and set your model thickness to fit with inside of your material. So you'll just need to choose a new thickness or height, type it into the field, and then click Apply. So in my case, it is 0.6239 of an inch thick, or the thickness of my composite model is that, and it does fit within that 0.75 inches. And the rapid Z gaps in start position, you're going to want to make sure they're safe and appropriate for your machine. In this case, they are for me. So we'll just go ahead and click OK. Now let's go straight into your sketch carving toolpath, and we're going to choose 3D model instead of bitmap. Okay, again, because this is a V-carving toolpath, we can choose a start depth. In this case, it's going to be 0 right on the top of my material. And then we're not going to choose a flat depth right now because we're not quite sure exactly what's going to be happening over here in our sketch carving. We're going to use that same V-bit that we used in our last example, and we're going to choose model boundary this time around. And you'll see that right away in our 2D view that we've got some of the areas in green that our sketch carving toolpath strategy has picked up. as detail that we may want to go ahead and sketch carve. So we'll leave it as it is right now. We can also use a selection of vectors to isolate our tooling so that we don't cut or sketch carve parts of our 3D composite model that we may not want to. Just like we did in the last example where we used a bitmap in our sketch carving toolpath strategy. And we can also use a selected level. So if we happen to have some mixed content in our project, we can go ahead and choose the level that our 3D content is on that we would like our software to sketch carve. Again, our boundary offset is used to extend the region in which our sketch carving is applied, and we'll just leave that at 0. And as again, like in our last example, we can change the line thickness if we'd like to. So if we turn it up, use our slider, you'll see that we get thicker, bolder detail. If we slide it down, you can see that we even get much sharper detail in the end. Now you can go ahead and combine multiple sketch carving tool paths so that you can have nice fine detail and some bolder detail mixed in if you'd like to. That might be something you might want to explore when you get some time. For right now, we're going to put this back to 13. Because I think that gives me a nice balance of detail that I'd like to get. I can project this onto a 3D model. So if I decided that I wanted to go ahead and cut the 3D model and then project the sketch carving onto that, maybe to pull out some of the extra detail, then I could go ahead and do that. And I can also use the vector selector. And we'll just call this sketch carving and we'll calculate that. And then what you can see in our 3D view is the actual toolpath that's created. And we can preview that visible toolpath. And we can also go ahead and apply a color to that. And it's using a global fill color of black, but we can change that toolpath color to be black if I'd like to. That way I can vary the colors if I want. Now that looks really nice, and that would cut a whole lot faster than doing the 3D roughing and finishing toolpaths. Again, this gives us a great opportunity to show customers that we can not only provide them with a 3D version of their project, but also a 2D version, which might be a little bit more cost effective for them. Now with that, I can close that down, and I can go ahead now and select my text vectors, and I can add some simple V-carving to this. So we're going to choose a flat depth, or start depth of 0, We're not going to use a flat depth. We'll use that same V-bit, remove the clearance tool. And typically when you are going to use V-carving with 3D content, you're probably going to want to project it onto your 3D model. But because we're creating sketch carving, we don't want to choose that because we want to actually cut right in the surface of our material. So we can call this V-carve and we'll calculate that. And we can preview that visible toolpath. And then we can go ahead and give that a color as well if we'd like to. Now that looks really, really nice. Now I'd like to do one more thing to this job, and that is I would like to add a nice bold object line around the profile of this composite layout. So to do that, I'm going to go ahead and close down my 3D preview. In my 3D view, I can go ahead and hold down my Shift key and select both of those components. Now they make up the perimeter of my composite model. And if I go ahead and just bring up temporarily my design tab and go down here to where I can create a vector boundary around the selected components. If I choose that and I click back here again, you'll see that now I have a vector boundary around the outside of my composite layout. And what I can do with that is go ahead and choose a profile toolpath, a start depth of 0. We'll make it a very slight cut depth. We don't need to show our advanced toolpath options. We'll use a 1/16 inch end mill for this. We're going to cut outside that line, so that way we won't actually remove any of the detail or the sketch carving detail that happened on the inside of that line. And we're just going to call that profile 1, and we're going to calculate that. Then we preview that visible toolpath. And if we go ahead and color that in black, then you see that now we have a nice bold object line around the outside of your composite model. And I have to say that that looks really nice. Again, keep in mind that you can go ahead and use any 3D content that you want to in your sketch carving toolpath strategy. We are sure you can see that using the sketch carving strategy with your photos is a great alternative to photo V-carving, and with its ability to give you another option with your 3D content, it can't be underestimated. This feature, when combined with all the other tools in your software, will help up your game, and the possibilities are nearly endless.